Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Amazing Podcast. And we hope you're enjoying the series of conversations we're having around cloud native and Kubernetes. We're really passionate about it, and we really keep tight focus on talking about this space, cloud native Kubernetes, and we love talking about open source. And today is going to be about that. There's going to be a lot of talk about open source and how do you really work with open source, especially with projects that need long-term support. Um, I'm Twain Taylor, editor at amazic.com. That's amazic.com. And if you like the content, you like the conversation here, head over to our website and check out all the other stuff that we have going on. There are a whole lot of other similar conversations that we've been doing over the past almost 3 years now. So there's a lot for you to catch up on if you like more of this. And with that, I want to welcome our guest for today. I have with me Joe Carter, who is the enterprise architect at OpenLogic by Perforce. Joe, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks, Twain. Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
All right, Joe, to get us started, we're curious to know about you and just your journey in this space so far. I know you're deep into open source in what you do at Perforce. Tell us about your journey so far, how you got into open source, and how you got to Perforce.
Sure. So I started my career around 1996, back in the early days. It was right around the release of Windows 95. I started doing technical support for CompuServe internet services. So some of you might remember CompuServe. It was kind of a AOL, American Online competitor back here in the States back in the 90s and early 2000s. And I also at the same time worked for basically a phone support company that did outsourcing. And then I worked on the Gateway 2000 account for a long while. And I kind of just continued my career moving into a kind of a mom and pa style internet service provider, and did network engineering for them and network consulting services. And then probably I'd say around 1998, 99, I started seeing that some of our customers at the ISP, they were needing help with web applications and trying to do stuff, on this new thing called the internet, and have it more than just be an information, a phone book directory, right? So I quickly saw a need that we were going to be moving away from these thick style, thick app on the PCs and moving to web applications. And I started focusing my career at that point on kind of the middleware services. So application servers, J2EE style applications. And I quickly saw that there was a disconnect between developers and the system administrators. And they're usually pointing their fingers, no, it's your system, no, it's your code. And saw very quickly there was a need for somebody to straddle kind of both of those worlds. So I started focusing on that in the early 2000s. So kind of came at it more from a systems engineering background, and networking background, but would have to sit there and work with the developers to make sure their code got deployed right, figure out what went wrong when it moved to a different environment, and kind of just continuously progressed in handling the deployments and getting those, moving them from production and development and testing to production. And then all of a sudden this word came about called DevOps, and I realized, oh wait, I've been doing DevOps since the 1998, 97, and so started focusing on that. And then and during this whole time, it was, did a lot of with Microsoft services, MTS packages, DTS stuff, and IIS, their active server pages. But at the same time, we'd have a lot of Java development work as well, as far as, Java apps that were being put out there. And I quickly saw that my life was easier when I was working in the open source world, when I was working with JBoss compared to IIS or Tomcat, or, compared to some active server pages, deploying a web out there. So I kind of consciously made the decision that I wanted to focus on open source technologies. Because one, I could figure them out easier because the source code was available. I can work with them without having kind of a black box in front of me. I can actually go figure out exactly what something's doing, and that just made my life infinitely easier. And then, and of course, during this whole time, I'm doing OS support, handling the Linux servers that were running, and so it just kind of naturally fell to the point to where I was just constantly only working in a Linux/Unix environment. Java open source was basically what I did day in and day out.
Mhm.
And I think it was about 2015. I was actually had just a startup that I'd been working with called SoftCard that did a mobile wallet application. We got bought by Google, and of course they just wanted the IP, so they didn't want any of the people, and they basically just wanted to shut it down for Google Wallet. But so they had a few people that we kept around to keep the lights on to the end of the contract that we had with Google to keep the services up and running until they wanted to shut down. And I was kind of at a crossroads. Was I even going to stay in technology at that point? Where about that point in time, had about 3 months left on my severance package after they had finally wrapped everything up, and I got a call to interview for an enterprise architect position with this company called Open Logic. And I started talking to them. They're like, yeah, we do open source software support. We're all about open software adoption. And it just started checking off a lot of boxes in my head that I was just naturally passionate about. So I was actually on the fence. I was about to become a full-time skydiver and just go do tandems for a living.
Mhm.
This job got offered to me. I was like, dang it, I can't pass this one up. So, over almost 10 years later, a little over 9 years later, actually, it's
Wow.
still here. So
Yeah, that
that's
is a long time. Quite a journey. And yeah, it's great that you're able to connect the dots across your career, talking about how you've been doing DevOps from before even the term was coined. And you're kind of able to connect the dots, I think, as your career progressed. That's really cool.
Right, right. And it's been interesting to see, especially there's a cyclical behavior that I've noticed. I've been doing this long enough that I can kind of see patterns. And when I first started in this in the tech industry, the you know the deployment methodology was basically these thick apps on PCs, right? But even before that, we had everything was on a mainframe, and still had to do a lot of work with insurance and banking customers that a lot of them still on mainframe stuff. But so you had the applications were deployed to a single location, and then people accessed it remotely. And then, oh, we don't want to do it that way anymore. There's a better way. We have these PCs. We don't have to pay all this money for compute time on these mainframes. And so they distributed everything out to the PCs. And then it's like, well, that takes a lot of work. We got to go out and touch all these PCs. What if we brought everything centralized again and made a web app? And then everything started centralizing on the web app. And it's like, okay, well, now we have all this hardware to manage in our server rooms. What if we push this out onto the cloud? And then, so now we're pushing it out on the cloud as decentralized, but now we have these huge cloud bills. And so one of the things we see happening a lot now is people kind of rolling back onto on-prem again. So watching the cyclical nature of the industry has been very interesting for me.
Mhm. Wow. I think you really summarized, I think, different waves of, evolution within technology and cloud really well in just like a minute or so just now. That was really cool.
And now we're at the containerization phase where everything's moving from VMs to containers, and And it's been a wild ride over the past 28 some odd years or so.
Yeah, I can tell that you're really good at just weaving the stories together and seeing how they relate to each other. That's really cool. I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation. I wanted to ask about as organizations move to adopt open source, I'm sure you've seen many of those kind of projects over the span of your career.
Mhm.
Could you tell us about uh, that journey? What makes them want to take that step of adopting open source? And then along the way, what challenges come up?
Right. So, I don't think there's a company that hasn't adopted open source at this point. It is ubiquitous. It is everywhere, these days. But I think more specifically, when you look at, okay, are we running, Oracle as our database server, or are we running Postgres? And I think a lot of the impetus for that is a couple of things. One is, of course, is dollar signs, right? The everybody gets sticker shock seeing how much each core costs for a modern Oracle license or Microsoft license, and then you have to pay on support on top of that. So there's how do we save money, and surprisingly, that's probably, like, it is a great reason to look at your licensing and what you're paying, but it's not necessarily some of the benefits, because or some of the best benefits that you can get from switching to open source, because it can definitely help with your bottom line, but there's other costs that you're not going to think of, such as, like, there's development costs where you might have a mature dedicated development staff working on features that might not necessarily exist, or might not exist with the same bells and whistles in your open source stuff. And so there's this hidden cost that people kind of forget about, that can make the first initial idea of, oh, we're going to save a ton of money. It's like, well, you'll probably save some money, but not quite as much as you might think, depending on how many people you need to pay to help you implement these bells and whistles that you might need to use. Where I think it really, and I think this is an impetus for a lot of companies to start using open source, is the freedom to innovate. That is, to me, the biggest advantage of open source software. You're not restricted to a license. And I find that this has happened to me a lot in my career, where I would be trying to find a way to do something better, easier, to make my life easier. And I could go stand up a POC real quick, get something, say, hey, I have this, it works. Can we implement this in production, right? And that life cycle from idea to execution is so much faster with open source tooling rather than closed source stuff. So, and so I think kind of the innovation, I think, is a lot of the impetus for a lot of companies, even though they might focus more on the dollar signs, but being able to quickly innovate and go from idea to execution, I think, is where it really shines for a lot of companies.
Right, all right, very interesting. And when it comes to open source, of course, it's a huge world, and there's so many projects, so many things that they do. Uh, where have you focused the bulk of your attention? Have you tried to solve end-to-end issues across the software delivery chain, or have you focused on any particular part of them? Or you could even talk about even OpenLogic's focus.
Sure. Yeah, so me personally, both, honestly. So like I said, I kind of focused in the late 2000s, or late 90s, early 2000s, on kind of the middleware space. So doing I spent a lot of time working with Tomcat and JBoss, those two particularly, and then of course Apache, which and Nginx. So kind of that middleware delivery layer of web applications is really where I spent about 15 years in that space, focused on it. Whereas now I've spent the last like 5-6 years really focusing more on you mentioned Kubernetes, so containerization and orchestration has been something I've been really focusing a lot on. And there's just so many disciplines that's like, oh, I want to get into this, but it's just really hard to have the time. But yeah, I think containerization orchestration is something that I've personally been focusing a lot on over the past several years. But as OpenLogic as a whole, we focus on the full stack. So we have support packages for just about any type of technology stack you could think of. So we have, from the database layer to the application layer to the messaging layer to the presentation layer, we touch everything in that stack, at least some technology. And one of the things we try to do is we try to look at the marketplace and see, what has a lot of adoption, what are people using, what do people need help with, and then we look at, okay, what layer in the stack do they need help with there, and then what technologies in that layer are going to be, kind of the biggest bang for the buck for the most people. So yeah, so like the database layer, we support Postgres. We support a bunch of NoSQL, so we have MongoDB that we support. We support Cassandra. Everything at that, several different technologies at that layer. At the application layer, we're, like I mentioned, Tomcat, JBoss. Spring Boot is another one we work a lot with. Messaging, Kafka and ActiveMQ and RabbitMQ are basically the big three that we're spending a lot of time working with. And then at the presentation layer, of course, Nginx and Apache are pretty common.
Wow, really cool. I want to touch on again something we were just talking about a little earlier, which is the adoption process or the migration. I wanted to ask about, from what you've seen, what are some of the side effects or some of the after effects rather of migration where I guess you'd often be left with parts of zombie IT that, you probably want to get rid of or you can't get rid of, and you need to somehow deal with. Could you talk a bit about that part of the migration?
Sure. And that's a common part of the migration that most people don't, plan for. It's like, hey, we've done it. We're now running on Postgres or, whatever, and we're done. And it's like, well, not necessarily, because you have two major things, and one you touched on absolutely perfectly is turning the old services off. So one of the things that I've run into a lot is where the open source product gets about 99% of what they need, but there still might be a 1% or 2% use case where they don't have the ability to meet that. And so usually what happens is they leave that infrastructure there and in place. Now, a lot of times that'll be with a lower bill for that, but as far as, licensing and your cloud costs and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's like, that kind of, a lot of people get kind of disillusioned with that, saying, well, I thought we did this so we could turn this off, and now we're not able to. And what we usually try to help with is try to identify those edge cases that might not be 100% fit, and then come up with a plan on how to make it fit. And a lot of times it's going to be custom development, right? You're going to have to come in, you're going to have to change something about your application architecture, or your infrastructure, but if you don't have that built into your plan, it's going to be kind of a rude system shock when you have to do that if you're not thinking about it. And the second issue that we kind of run into is application updates, and I don't think that's necessarily specific to open source, but one of the things with open source is it moves a lot faster. The cadences for releases in a lot of open source projects are way faster than closed source projects. So we have a customer that was working with Wildfly. I think they were on 16 when they opened up a ticket with us not too long ago. Well, Wildfly is already like, I think 28 or is like the lowest supported version, they're pushing out a new major release every quarter, basically. And so not having a plan in place to keep up to speed with the releases, especially in this day and age with the security that the back in the day where it's like, okay, we're doing bi-yearly or hopefully at least quarterly security updates to all of our infrastructure. We can't do that anymore. That you're going to end up, your organization's going to end up in the news most likely if you're not keeping up with your security updates. Although I say that, we just had a huge major outage due to a faulty security update with so was it Strike Point, I believe, or Microsoft, but that's still, so the ability to keep up to date and have that that patching cadence match the open source world is something that I think a lot of customers find challenging too after the migration.
Mhm. And what about when it comes to like your customers coming to OpenLogic, at what point do they usually get to you? Is it at the early
Yeah.
planning stage itself, normally at the firefighting stage when things are already broken and it's things are.
So when they come to us with their hair on fire, they basically didn't have a solid implementation plan, or they didn't understand a lot about what they were implementing to begin with, and they'll paint themselves into a corner.
Mhm.
Which is kind of, for me, that's usually a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot to go in there and fix. There's a lot to go in there and look really good. That's not hard. uh,
Yeah.
so
So what's the approach that OpenLogic usually takes, and what are some of the most like common solutions that end up, that need to be put in place in this situation, considering someone has already gone through the migration and are not successful so far? What are some of the first responses, and how do you chart a path to, getting things back to normal?
right. So one of the things, the first thing we're going to do is look at, what is actually the problem. What is there a major outage you're facing? Is it a intermittent outage? And then we're going to look at, okay, what bubble gum and duct tape do we need to string together to just make you, you know, make you meet your SLAs, right? What's the bare minimum fastest we can do to get you your head above water and then surviving? And a lot of times that's part of our break fix support, because a lot of times there is something that's specifically broken, and then we go in and try to resolve it and fix it. And then the second step is to come back is like, okay, let's do an entire implementation evaluation. Let's look at actually what you've done, and a lot of times what we'll find is people didn't get the sizing right. They didn't know they needed, they implemented two, like Kafka, for instance, they implemented two brokers, but they actually needed three, stuff like that. So we can come back through and kind of look at, okay, we've got your head above water, you have the life jacket. How do we build the boat now for you to actually have you get out on the high seas there? So
Yeah. So for those of the viewers who are watching this, could you show us visually kind of OpenLogic, what OpenLogic does and how it's
sure,
structured? Yeah.
sure. Let me share my screen here. This is not cooperative. There we go. So OpenLogic, our main focus is enterprise technical support for open source software. As we are OpenLogic by Perforce, so we are a part of a bigger suite of tools across a lot of different applications. Some of your viewers are probably familiar with Helix and Puppet. JRebel is another common one that a lot of people use. So Zend is another open source product that is in our wheelhouse. But so I focus on OpenLogic, like I said, and we kind of focus on the the full stack, runtimes, frameworks, middleware, data technologies, infrastructure, operating systems, infrastructure automation. So as you can see, we have quite a bit of different products that we handle support and professional services for at basically every layer of the stack that the organization can be using. We offer gold level technical support for a lot of these, for actually all of these here on this slide. It's a lot. And you know, to your guys' point, we do a lot of Kubernetes, Rancher, Cryo, Docker, that
Yeah,
whole
CNCF projects and
yeah. So we're kind of all over the place, but we have set our technologists, our enterprise architects, have the experience to be able to do this, which is pretty impressive, honestly. One of the things that I really like about working with OpenLogic is the quality of our enterprise architects. We really focus on being a one vendor for kind of one ring to rule them all type of thing. We're completely vendor neutral, so we're unbiased when it comes to actually giving our advice and what we think. We definitely like one of the things, and I think a lot of people have probably gotten into before, is you get 4 different vendors on a phone call and it's just a finger pointing at, oh, it's them, no, it's us, it's them. Well, we try to just stop all that, because if you have your entire stack is we're supporting it, we're not going to tell you, hey, it's somebody else, unless it's a hardware thing or something. But we try to be as holistic as possible. And again, we can do that because of the level of experience that we have. Our enterprise architects, we have an average about 15 years of experience in the industry. Like myself, I'm about 28 years. I think our most senior architect is like going on like 36 years. So, we have a very large breadth of experience between us all. And so that's mainly our OSS technical support. We support over 400 packages, but one of the things that's really been kind of quite successful in what we've been doing here lately is our long-term support offerings. So we have 3 of those that we do now. We have CentOS LTS, AngularJS LTS, and Bootstrap. And for the CentOS long-term support, we do basically high severity vulnerability patching and maintaining internal versions, and maintaining the internal versions of the post ELL CentOS. But so if CVE comes in with a score of 7 or higher, we're going to put a patch for that. So basically just keeping the lights on until people figure out a way and the best way to migrate off of that. And you can see here CentOS 6, we're doing until December 31st next year, 7 going out to 2029, and then 8 we're doing 2026. So that's been a very popular product we've been helping a lot of companies with as well. And then Angular support, pretty much the same thing. We're doing 1.610 is we're maintaining until December 31st, 2030. Same thing with 1.8. And here we're looking at CVE scores 4 and higher. Fixes for breaking changes and new web browsers or jQuery updates. And basically same thing with Bootstrap long-term support. We're pushing Bootstrap version 3 and 4. We're extending that LTS out to 2030. So that's pretty much OpenLogic in a nutshell there.
Really neat. I want to ask about a bit more about this long-term support, and especially about security for open source projects. Could you talk about some of the a bit more of the intricacies of open source security? What usually happens that makes customers sit up and take notice? Hey, we need to really fix this on priority. It's a big security issue, and we should have known this tell us about that. When do the alarm bells go off?
Yeah.
And just what happens during that whole process?
So one of the things that we've gotten better at as an industry, I'm kind of pat ourselves on the back on, is proactive scanning. That is something that, and when I say proactive scanning, I mean proactively scanning our code, proactively scanning our dependencies. Like we've been doing infrastructure and deployment scannings, scanning what's deployed out there, but not so much our code bases. So one of the, and this has kind of been evident in pretty much almost all the high recent profile data breaches. They've been supply chain attacks. So it might not be the actual product that was found vulnerable, but the dependencies within that product were found vulnerable. So what we've done better as an industry is we're proactively scanning and looking for those. So a lot of, and that's where we get a lot of our tickets and our engagement with our customers comes from them scanning their code base and their dependencies. And then, of course, just CVE publication, saying, hey, seeing that there is a new CVE. So a lot of times, it's funny, we'll have customers that come to us and like, hey, we scanned our packages and we found, X, Y, and Z packages. They have this CVE. And if it's not a brand new CVE, it's most likely we've already addressed it. We've already patched it because we keep a pretty close eye on those CVE publications. We had a customer come to us the other day saying, "Hey, we scanned our application and there's about 8 different CVEs that we found, and we need the patches for that." And it's like, well, we've actually already patched those, and the internal version, since they're end of life, so we maintain our own OL Open Logic internal version. And if you update to the most internal version, all of those were already fixed. So a lot of the customers, thankfully, it's not after an actual security incident happens that most people are finding out, which I think we're getting much better at as an industry, thankfully.
Wow, great. Any particular security monitoring tools that you want to call out that are particularly good at scanning open source code repositories and finding CVEs and other vulnerabilities?
One of the ones I've actually been working with a lot here lately has been I've been doing some projects on Google Cloud, and their container scanning has been really impressive, has really impressed me. I found several vulnerable containers that, just by updating the manifest was fixed, and they've that one's been working pretty well since in the project I've been working on here recently. Another one, which is something that I don't think a lot of companies are doing yet, is we're doing a lot of infrastructure as code these days. We're describing our infrastructure being as a code base, but we're not really doing a whole lot of security scanning in there to make sure that if we're deploying to AWS, do we have any open ports that we shouldn't have? Do we have any principals that have permissions to these machines that shouldn't have? And there's a company called Checkmarks that is doing a security as code product that I've been using a lot lately. So that one's been pretty interesting.
Neat. Wow, that's pretty cool. So as we wind down, Joe, I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on what you're keeping an eye on as we look to the next year or so. What interests you the most in terms of open source or DevOps? What's happening in our space?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about? What are you watching?
So of course, the biggest thing is AI, machine learning, and that infrastructure, and that's the big buzzword, but it's also one of the biggest innovations. So I kind of liken it to kind of seeing where we were with before we went to web applications, or the migration from physical computers to VMs to containers. I think kind of the next big shift will be the AI implementation that's already starting to happen. But I think the biggest challenge that we're going to see, and I think we're going to see a lot of innovation there in the open source space, is kind of AI ops or ML ops. How do we take our training models that we've built and then actually integrate them into our application? What does that CI/CD workflow look like? What do those regression tests look like? And I think that that space is going to be changing very rapidly. I don't know that I've seen any product that really knocks it out of the park yet. So I think that I'm eagerly awaiting that. That looks like a very greenfield space to me right now. So.
Wow, really interesting. Thanks so much, Joe, for sharing all of that with us today. It was a very interesting conversation. And for all of our listeners and viewers watching and listening, I hope that you took something away about just how open source has been changing and where it's at today. And as you migrate, as you deal with security issues, as you deal with needing long-term support for specific projects, there are these different issues that we discussed. Hopefully you got some ideas about how you could approach them, what you can do, what your options are, and go and check out definitely OpenLogic, see what they're up to. It's fascinating that Joe says, they have an end-to-end solution for open source. And of course, the number of projects that we saw on that screenshot definitely says a lot. They're putting in a lot of work in their open source efforts. So go and check them out. Joe, before you go though, just a question to get to know you a bit more. You said you almost became a professional skydiver. Tell us a bit more about that. Did you get certified? What was the plan? Were you going to do a job?
Yeah. So I had been skydiving for many years during it. That's one of my passions, my hobbies. I'm a competitive skydiver. I compete in it's called speed skydiving, which is basically your fastest 3-second average over a window from like 12,000 feet to like 5,600 feet. And the fastest 3 seconds is your score, basically. And as far as doing it professionally, so at the time when I was, kind of working through the severance process with my previous company as they were shutting everything down, I was a coach, a skydiving coach. So I would help people finish all the requirements that they needed for their A license, which is the first, your first certified skydiving license that basically proves that you're not going to kill yourself and you're not going to kill other people. you know how to do this well enough. So I helped with the last part of that, and then which doesn't make a whole lot of money, but the kind of the next step is to actually become a certified instructor, to where you teach people how to fly their own parachute and jump, do it solo. But then there's also tandem. So I was looking at becoming a tandem instructor, which surprisingly you can make some pretty decent money, livable anyway. But so that was my plan, to be a full-time skydiving bum, and OpenLogic just stepped up and it made it too interesting for me to pass. So
All right, but I'm sure you still go skydiving every once in a while.
I do that. I do skydiving and a lot of paragliding, and those two, kind of non-powered human flight is kind of my jam. So
Really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Joe. It was a wonderful conversation. Do come back whenever something big goes down at OpenLogic. If you want to announce something, definitely come by.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Twain. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks to all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.